I grew up in a place where the sea never sleeps. The waves roared against the cliffs, and the wind carried secrets. The lighthouse stood tall, its light sweeping across the dark waters. People said it was a symbol of hope, but for me, it was my worst nightmare. My name is Eliza. I am 17 years old. I am the lighthouse keeper's daughter. My father was strict, his words sharp as the rocks below the lighthouse. He made rules, and I followed them. "You must stay here," he said. "The world outside is dangerous." My mother. She was a shadow in my life. My father said she died when I was a baby. He never spoke her name, and when I asked about her, he would say, "She couldn't handle this life. She wasn't strong." But I always felt there was more to the story. One night, a great storm came. The wind howled and rain lashed against the windows. My father shouted over the noise, "Eliza! Go to the attic and lock the windows." I obeyed, climbing the narrow stairs to the attic. As I reached for the last window, my foot hit something hard. I looked down and saw a small trunk hidden under a loose plank in the floor. It was old, covered in dust with rusty hinges. I bent down, trying to open it, but the latch wouldn't move. Before I could look closer, my father's voice boomed from below. "Eliza, what's taking you so long?" I quickly pushed the trunk back into place. When my father came up the stairs, his eyes fell on the spot where the trunk was hidden. His face darkened. "What were you doing?" he demanded. "Nothing," I said, my voice small. He stepped closer, his shadow looming over me. "Stay out of that attic," he said. "That's my warning." But his anger only made me more curious. I couldn't stop thinking about the trunk. What was inside? Why didn't he want me to see it? A few nights later, when my father was asleep, I crept into his office. The drawer of his desk stuck for a moment, then slid open. Inside, I found an old brass key. I held my breath and carried it to the attic. The wind outside was loud, like whispers from the sea. With trembling hands, I unlocked the trunk. Inside, I found faded photographs of a woman with kind eyes. She wore a silver necklace, the same one I found lying in the trunk. There were also letters tied with ribbon, and beneath them, a leather-bound diary. On the first page, I saw her name, Margaret, my mother. I sat down with the diary and began to read. Her words were like sunlight at first, warm and full of hope. "The lighthouse is beautiful," she wrote. "It feels like a beacon of strength, and I feel lucky to call it home." She wrote about meeting my father. He was charming and passionate, and she believed she had found a man who would protect her forever. But as I turned the pages, her words began to change. "The lighthouse feels smaller every day. He doesn't let me leave. He says the villagers gossip too much. I miss the world outside, but he keeps me locked away." My mother felt trapped. My heart ached for her as I read her pain. Then I found the darkest entries. "His temper is getting worse. He shouts, throws things, and sometimes he hurts me. I don't know how much more I can take." And finally, "Tonight, I will leave. I must leave before it's too late. But how can I leave my baby Eliza? She is my light in the dark." I froze. My father had always told me my mother died in an accident. But now I wasn't so sure. After reading the diary, I couldn't look at my father the same way. His face, his voice, his every move. It all felt different. I noticed things I had ignored before. The way his eyes narrowed when I didn't obey. The scratches on the staircase railing, as though someone had grabbed it in a struggle. The patch of wood near the stairs that didn't match the rest of the floor. My father watched me closely too. One morning, he said, "You've been quiet. Is there something you want to tell me?" "No," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But I could feel his suspicion. You've been in the attic again, haven't you? He said, his tone sharp. I warned you to stay out of there. I didn't answer. He slammed his fist on the table, making the dishes rattle. Stay away from things you don't understand, Eliza. That's my final warning. But I couldn't stop. I needed answers. One day, when my father went to the village for supplies, I went to find someone who might know the truth. I spoke to Thomas, an old fisherman who had known my parents. He looked at me sadly when I mentioned my mother. She was a kind woman, he said. But she wasn't happy here. Everyone knew it. Your father, well, he didn't like people asking questions. Did you see her after she fell? I asked, my voice shaking. Thomas hesitated, then shook his head. Number, your father didn't let anyone near. He said it was too late by the time we got there. My chest tightened. I felt like I couldn't breathe. That evening, I placed the diary on the table in front of my father. He stared at it, his face pale. What's this? He said. You know what it is, I replied. It's her diary. Mother's diary. I know what you did. He looked away, his hands curling into fists. You don't understand. She was scared of you, I shouted. She wanted to leave and you didn't let her. You hurt her. He slammed his hand on the table, his voice rising. She wanted to take you away from me. We argued, yes, but it was an accident. She fell. I didn't mean for it to happen. His words echoed in the room, but I didn't believe him. My heart broke into pieces. I'm leaving, I said. I won't stay here anymore. You're not going anywhere, he growled. You belong here, Eliza, just like she did. That night, the storm returned. I packed a small bag with my mother's necklace, the diary, and a few clothes. I had arranged for Thomas to meet me at the cliffs with his boat. As I opened the door to leave, my father appeared at the top of the stairs. Where do you think you're going? He asked, his voice cold. I'm leaving, I said. He stepped toward me, his shadow long and dark. You're just like her. Weak. Foolish. He grabbed my arm, his grip tight. I struggled, pulling away. The stairs were wet from the storm, and as he reached for me again, he slipped. I watched in horror as he fell down the stairs. I didn't wait to see if he was alive. I ran through the storm to the cliffs, where Thomas was waiting. As his boat sailed away, I looked back at the lighthouse. Its light swept across the water, but I felt nothing for it. Months later, I moved to a small, peaceful town. I wore my mother's necklace every day, her diary safe in my drawer. Now, when I think of the lighthouse, I don't feel anger or sadness. I feel free.